All right, it's time to open up for city council meeting. It looks like we have enough for a quorum. They're missing a couple of folks. Don't even need one.
As far as I know. I don't think.
Either way, it's time to get started. We're here to talk about stormwater, yet again, our favorite subject. Kick off the year. Adam, are you the one that's going to get us started on this discussion?
You bet, if you want. So, so we're here to take a look at our stormwater utility fee structure. As discussed before, you know, we need our rates to be based on something that's legal, fair, and equitable to all the ratepayers. We believe that a fee that's equitable is the one that's proportional to the amount of stormwater runoff and demand that's put on the city system. And that applies to stormwater quality as well as volume. And because stormwater runoff picks up pollutants as well as increases in volume and velocity when flowing over impervious surface is the most important factor influencing stormwater runoff on individual parcels. And because of that reason, it's the most common element in calculating stormwater fees across the country. There are several basic methods that are used across the nation, and some of them are slightly different depending on what community that they're used in. And I put together a memo that goes through those in detail. I didn't intend to go through each of those methods in detail, other than just to mention what they are and kind of how they work. We use the impervious surface method, or the ISA method. So we strictly charge per square foot of impervious surface per parcel. And again, as I'd mentioned, that's the most common method across the country. At the tail end of my memo, I included some survey data that was collected, that's collected annually across the country by Black and Veatch, and that's where I got that information. One of the disadvantages to impervious surface, the method, is the cost of collecting the impervious surface data. That's why a lot of communities try to avoid that and use, say, a flat fee. We have already made a significant investment in doing so and collecting that data, so we have that already. So that's not even a consideration as far as a negative for us in moving forward as far as our fee structure. And then there are a couple other methods. So equivalent residential unit, or an ERU, that's similar to what maybe the city of Colorado Springs is doing, where they go through and they calculate their total need, and then divide it by the number of parcels of and then decide what a typical parcel is as far as impervious surface, and then they charge that amount. Again, one reason you would do that is to try to avoid having to go collect individual data on each property. We have the advantage of telling a property exactly what their square footage is, where in this case, if you wanted to avoid collecting that data, this would be the route to go. And then the two other methods, intensity of development and equivalent hydraulic area, have to do, they really drill down into the detail of specifically the runoff and how it's affected by the parcel, whether it's impervious area or pervious area. And so those actually will collect additional funds even on the impervious area, because even pervious areas will eventually have runoff depending on the size of storm. And so one has some actual runoff factors that are a little more science involved in it. It gets really detailed. Both those methods are really hard typically for ratepayers to understand and for them to explain to them on their individual parcels. If we talked to Mr. Hammock before the meeting, as we move forward with this, if we want to look at any of those more specific and how typical properties within the city may look with each one of those types of methods, we can do that and put together some numbers. And then finally, there's a flat rate. As discussed previously, this is very problematic because it can be interpreted as a tax rather than a fee, and again, is not very fair and equitable to all the ratepayers. So currently within the city, we assess all properties, whether they're tax exempt, whether they're public, even the federal properties, state properties, everybody gets charged, with the exception of the city streets. The majority in the research that we did, the majority of utilities across the nation do not charge for public roads. There are some that do, but the majority do not. And one of the issues with charging or not charging is the source of funding. Of course, where does that come from? it's obviously going to come from the ratepayers. Since, the city doesn't have an additional fund to pay that for the streets. So finding a formula and how that, and I'm sure we're going to dive into that some more in this discussion, is finding the proper formula on how to do that equitably is somewhat problematic sometimes. Then there's a discussion of whether, stormwater costs should be funded through tax sources. So would it be right to use our 2A money for rebuilding roads to pay the stormwater fee? And what does that look like then to the taxpayers? And how do they feel about that? Then, another part of the issue is historically, especially here in Kansas City, any stormwater infrastructure we actually have was paid for with those tax dollars or general fund dollars anyway. So you could argue that the contribution has already been made to the system or the fund or the utility with those general funds or tax dollars previously when they actually installed the storm sewers or pipes. The other thing in Kansas City, especially in East Canyon, is the right-of-ways and the roads and the ditches, they are the stormwater system. So you're kind of, you're charging the system for itself, even though it's a dual purpose. So then we have to look at how do we handle state highway as well. We have some fairly significant amount of impervious surface that's in town that's state highway. And what does that look like with the state, CDOT, and so forth? Again, could be problematic, but again, wouldn't be fair unless we were charging for all those roads. We also don't charge for publicly accessed private roads currently. So an example would be the Sunrise Mesa PUD. They have some roads up there that were built to the city standard. We don't charge, that HOA for those roadways. So that's really the discussion on the fee structure and also the charging on the roads. And again, I know we're going to talk about that a little bit more because I know Dennis Wheat's here and wants to discuss some of that, and we can get into that. But the final thing that I had discussed in my memo and we want to discuss today was a credit system. Approximately half of the utilities that are surveyed do pay credits for basically, there's a whole kind of gamut of reasons they may pay a credit, but the majority pay because there's been some stormwater BMP installed on the property, whether it be water quality or water quantity. Typically, more credit is given for water quality versus, quantity versus quality. So some communities might, if you have a detention pond that reduces runoff volume, they may give you a 50% credit, whereas if you have just a water quality BMP, like a grass swell that treats the water but doesn't detain any, you may only do a 20% credit, something like that. So there's different ways that different communities do it. It makes sense to do that. We've talked about credits since the inception of the utility. We've never taken any further than that, just discussion. If that's something we want to look at, we have a couple numbers to discuss about that. But there would be an impact then again to the fund in what fees are collected, and so then that fee again, just like if we bill for the roads, if we afford credits, those credits, the cost of those credits would have to be spread out to the other ratepayers. And so again, I don't want to get into too much detail. I just kind of want to introduce everything, and then we can discuss, the roadway charges and credits further as we go through this. But really, that's all I have. We also included a table at the end of the memo that shows what the impacts would be for residential and commercial properties because keep in mind, if we take the amount that's billed for all the roads as impervious surface with the current rate, to offset that cost, we have to spread that cost out amongst all the ratepayers. And one of the current ideas is to do that evenly across residential and commercial. And so if we took that, Harry provided these numbers that you're looking at basically a $5 a month increase for residential properties. For our typical average residential property, you're looking at a $5 a month increase. Where you're looking at close to a $30 decrease for commercial properties. So you're basically taking that cost from the commercial parcels and shifting it to the residential. In order, that's essentially the only thing, we're not really paying for the streets, we're just shifting that cost. It's just a tool to shift that cost from commercial to residential, is what is happening. The third column there on the table is basically just an example, if we did a 20% credit for those parcels that have BMPs, you're looking at an 80 cent increase a month for every parcel, whether it's residential or commercial. You're basically, with our estimating, again, we would have to look at how we might treat, so we have that 112 parcels that currently would meet the standard of having a stormwater BMP on the property, but there's also some parcels that are impacted by BMPs that they pay for, like in a private HOA. And so we'd have to figure out how to calculate some of those, but essentially you're looking at about 120 parcels that would be impacted. And in giving them a 20% credit, basically you're looking at $30,000 for every 10% credit that we give. So and the example was given for 20%, but if you wanted to give a 10%, 50%, whatever that might be.
Why did you choose 20% for an example?
That seemed to be, in my research, seemed to be the number that most of them used. Yeah. There were some as high as 100%, and some of them in there at 50%, but the majority seemed to be about 20%.
Okay. Do you want to hear from Dennis next and go from there? Dennis, do you want to go ahead and come up? And this meeting the genesis of it was from your brainstorming, so we'd like to hear from you.
Thanks.
How many minutes do you think you need, Dennis?
2.
That could be too many.
I'm pretty sure you'll need more than the typical 3.
Yeah, I don't know. I will be as succinct as I can.
Okay.
It's, bottom line is, like I've expressed to the council before, it's businesses bear a huge burden already, and the businesses provide the lion's share of the city budget. And what I was looking for is a way to provide commercial property owners some sort of a relief. And the most obvious way was to just take into consideration the fact that streets are paved too. And, I didn't bring my notebook here with my little program on it, but I don't know if any of you played with it, but it works pretty slick, and you can pretty much make any scenario you want. And I haven't memorized the numbers, but based on the rough estimate that I had come up with of paved streets in the city, it was 36.5%, 36.61% to be exact. That number I do remember. And there was also a nifty little graph in there that shows what happens as you attribute more and more of the burden of stormwater to the streets. And Councilman Miser emailed me, asked me a question, is there any credit that we want to give to the streets as for being part of the stormwater system? And my response to that was, streets are actually, in my opinion, a major source of the stormwater problem. They're conduits, all right, but they're conduits to nowhere. That's why if we have a big storm event in North Canyon, there's 2.5 feet of water by Safeway, because the highway is a dam. And so the streets in town are conduits to get all the water to the dam faster. They don't solve the problem, they exacerbate the problem. And truthfully, I think it is fair to take the streets into consideration. I don't know that I'm going to argue for that, because I think you guys are going to, I don't know that you'll buy it. It'll be a hard sell, but You know, and I've had this, I've presented my idea is to have two components to the stormwater system, a per parcel fee and a impervious surface fee. And I think that's really the fair way to do it. Again, I'm not going to argue strongly for it, even though I feel very strongly that that is the fairest way to do it. You know, and then if it's so, and I talked to Tony and Harry before the meeting, and you know, the credit system has merit, but I don't think 20% is the right amount either. And I think, again, so there's 112 parcels, and those parcels, there's this huge gamut of what their stormwater impact is. And like Adam was saying, some of it is you know, best management practices. Some of those are, Adam's exact words were quantity versus quality. And quantity, I mean, flooding is caused by quantity, not quality. I mean, so in the credit system, there should be more credit for retaining quantity. And of course, there is value in quality, but in a flood situation, quality, the water treatment facilities in almost any instance are overwhelmed. And so there is no quality factor available in a real storm event. It just overwhelms it and the water goes where it goes. And I'm here advocating for commercial property, not for me in particular. Yeah, because I'm probably about average, but I will say in my particular case, I think I could effectively argue I should get a 100% credit. Now, I'm not going to, but I have a detention pond. There's not a drop of water that falls on my property that leaves any way other than through the ground. It goes into the ground. There is no outlet. There is no place for that water to go. I have a 4-foot high berm that collects water. And it's overkill by a long shot, but in any event, no water leaves the property. So, I mean, well, and I'd see, and then I know there's this discussion too that I don't buy into at all about, well, you know, there's these Tabor issues, and you got to be careful about that, you know, because the stormwater fee has to be equitable, and you don't want it to be a tax and not a fee. And I think, well, fees have to be justified based on the fact that they pay the costs. And it's kind of like our water treatment plant is a utility, and so it operates under those basic premises. It charges what it takes to operate the system. You know, and then I was thinking, well, what are some other examples where, you know, maybe this Tabor factor gets pulled into it? And we're in a Tabor timeout right now, but it has happened in the past here that we've had a Tabor refund. And I don't know if any of you recall, but the way that refund was distributed, to the best of my knowledge, was to water users. And so whatever the Tabor refund amount was, they divided that by the number of water taps, and that's what you got. And it had nothing to do with your contribution or it had nothing to do with any of that. It was simply divided out, and that's what you got. And that, I mean, that's why I'm a real advocate for everybody benefits from the streets, and the streets cause, I think that, me personally, I think the streets are the biggest cause. They're 36% of the impervious surface, but in terms of effect, I think they're much, much greater effect than that, because they're the conduit that rushes all the water down to the place where it has no place to go. And, you know, during any big storm event, if you drive around, if you happen to be out in town, the water isn't rushing through people's backyards, it's rushing down the streets. That's how it's getting to where it's going. So,
Is it all right if we open up for questions?
yeah.
Go ahead, Mr.
Well,
Hamrick.
Yeah, before we get to questions, I'd like to take a step back and reframe the debate, because this is really important to me to try and, as city council people, as citizens, as ratepayers, to understand what we're talking about here, because we've got two problems. The first problem is EPA-driven compliance problems. We're required by the federal government to have a stormwater permit, comply with that permit that requires us to spend money on certain actions, including establishing our own permitting program. That's the stormwater compliance problem. Right now, our stormwater fees are just taking care of that problem. All of the fees that everybody pays only pays for that part of the problem, okay? And that's it. On top of that, we have a stormwater quantity problem. That's where, when it rains, we have stormwater runoff. It goes to areas where it should not be and causes problems with flooding and all of those kinds of things. The monies to fix that problem is in a different bucket than the stormwater compliance problem, okay? And so really, unless we can keep straight in our minds that there's two problems here we're talking about, that because the solutions for each problem are different and need to be developed differently, and need to recognize whether properties have installed stormwater controls, that's a quantity problem. So right now, to try and start using quantity thinking to divvy up the fees is not the right way to go yet. We've got to, right now our stormwater program only pays for stormwater compliance. We're not even talking about yet, we're talking about it, that's why we're here, but we haven't come to any kind of solutions yet for how we tackle the stormwater quantity problem. And I think that what we've got, what the staff memo is starting to address, the quantity problem, that's what that's intended to address, not the compliance problem. And so, nonetheless, having said that, what we're hearing from Dennis, and I think what a lot of property owners would agree with, is that right now, for the compliance part of it, businesses appear to be shouldering too much of the burden. Okay, and so we've got to get that straight first. We've got to get straight. Do we have a fair and equitable system for businesses, for residences, to shoulder the stormwater compliance part of the money that the city needs to spend? And we also need to be looking into the future of how do we solve the quantity problem. That's what people see when it rains all the time. What is not so, evident is the stuff that Glenda's doing for us, on the compliance side of things. And so I think it's really important to frame it, because if we can't keep those two buckets separate, we're going to confuse ourselves, get confused about what are the potential solutions, because without identifying a clear identification of the problem, we can't get to the right kind of solution.
Thank you. Thank you for setting the stage for our conversation moving forward.
Can I'd like to put a little historic perspective.
So I'll give you 1 minute.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fine. It won't take that long. I was on the council when the original stormwater utility fee was started, and when it was started, the intent was to generate about $1 million per year war chest to solve quantity problems. Now, a couple of years ago, and I'm not going to argue good or bad, but the city kind of pulled a little sleight, I'll call it sleight of hand, accounting magic, and all of that $1 million that was going into this war chest got diverted into the general fund to cover costs that the city was incurring maintaining the stormwater systems and things like that. So, I mean, the original intent was to generate $1 million to fix stormwater problems, not for the maintenance, not to cover the maintenance of the system, but that intent has been modified.
Okay, so before Dennis sits down, do you guys have any questions for him? Go ahead, Councilman Meisner.
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. The next time it rains up on North 9th, you need to come out in my back patio with me, and you will see water running through a backyard and not the street. Guaranteed,
Okay.
whatever that's worth.
And the next time it rains hard, I'll invite you to come to my property and see how much water is running off of it.
Oh, I know, there isn't any.
Well, we
There
can
isn't
go
any.
on, we can go on lots and lots of properties and see how stormwater's running all over places it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you, Dennis. We appreciate your comments, and that you've put a lot of time and effort and passion into this, and we really appreciate you opening up the dialogue to make sure that we do the right thing for residents and commercial businesses.
Okay,
So-
well, I would encourage, my final comment would be, I would encourage you to take a closer look at that 20%. And I don't know if you want to modify it per property or if you want to make it across the board, but I think it's too low. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes?
I want to make a comment here. You know, we've been discussing stormwater, I don't know how many times, over and over and over, and we finally came up with a fee structure that we looked at. I understand Dennis's, comment with regard to the commercial business and he represents them. But during all of those meetings we've had, I have not seen anyone from the big businesses that have those fees. There's no one from Walmart, there's no one from the shopping centers, there's no one of all these other things coming in here to voice their concerns, to also, I guess, back up what Dennis is saying. So, and they've had more than one opportunity. And I would think, if I'm a business owner, like Walmart and that, I'd be knocking on your door right away, because I'm probably one of the biggest people that's getting hit by impervious surface. So that's what I look at. The only thing I look at with stormwater is that we develop the plan that we need to develop to comply with the EPA rulings that we have to live with, and then also get some money set aside to do the things that we need to do. However the formula comes out, I'm not really, I really don't care about that, as long as we can accomplish those two goals. Keep the EPA requirements done, and then accomplish a fund where we can start doing some of the things we need to do. Thank you.
Other comments from council? Go ahead.
I don't know where to start, but this second chart, I'm not sure I understand that.
This one?
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to
Yeah.
ask for
So the
clarification. on
first
that, too.
column reflects current pricing for residents, based on the average impervious surface, and commercial property owners based on average impervious surface. And that reflects the potential for the COPS financing. So that's what's in effect today. The second column reflects if we were to pursue Dennis's concept of charging for street frontage, this would be the effect. The average residential account would rise by $456 a month, or $54.72 a year. The average commercial account will actually be reduced by $28.12, or $338 a year. And then that's, the third column reflects what the total would be per month over column A. And then the final reflects the 80 cents that that's a generic charge to both residents and businesses to cover the potential cost if you wanted to pursue a credit system. In this case, it was based on 20%. As Dennis said, it could be less, it could be more, but that's up to the council's prerogative. But we wanted to give you a sense. So for the average resident and the average business, they would pay, assuming a 20% credit program, $9.60 a year. I mean, we do think there's probably some merit and validity to a credit system. And as Adam's indicated, about half the systems in the country are providing credits. Then it's a question, if you believe in the credit system, what should the range be? Should it be done on an individualized basis? I mean, that would take up quite a bit of staff time to do that, or just an across-the-board percentage credit. But at the end of the day, it's a zero-sum game. All the customers have to pay for that credit.
Yeah, and if you're interested in the credit, then what we would do is take that back and further analyze that, and bring real numbers rather than just estimates. Because again, we have the data available. We can actually give you actual numbers
Just
of
wanted to give you
impacts.
a general sense of what the impact would be.
Adam, if we pursued the credit, from my perspective, if we did a credit, it would seem like that we would have some form of variable credit.
It
Is
could
that-
be, yes.
I don't know how that looks, but even if you did a stepped process, what's your calculation process? I mean, how would you calculate?
Well, that's what I'm saying. We would probably bring you a couple options, a couple examples, and with calculations based on how it would impact our budget. And we'd say, you know, here's just a flat 50%, and here's what would happen. Here's what would happen if you did 20% for quality and did 50% for quantity. You know, we could bring you a whole slew of different numbers. We would just need more time to put that together if you want to entertain it.
I mean, I think, and I've always sided with Dennis on this, that correct me if I'm wrong, but the city required him to create some kind of a retention system.
Sure, yeah. Again, I started out, my statement was fair and equitable, you know, and
So, I mean,
the
we
credit
got-
system is definitely.
we have no
plays into
argument.
that.
We got systems where we're mandating that they create detention, and there seems to be no benefit to that customer once we've required them to do that. It seems like the credit, however that would work, would at least address that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll
So-
go to my grave with the street thing.
And we are down to a reasonable number of roughly 112, 120 parcels, so it's not so large that it would get out of hand. We just need to come up, as Adam has
Yeah.
indicated, a
And I-
very fair,
Some
but also
systems have-
practical system. We don't want to make it so exotic.
Right.
Yeah, but there's some systems that you get credit for voluntary. Let's say let's say your detention pond doesn't just handle your developed flow, your impact. Because that's what we do now. It's what is the minimum impact that you have, and then we have you detain that. If someone built something bigger, or they did it voluntarily, just because they feel good about Mother Earth and all that sort of stuff, that's what you would do, and you'd have a different credit for that. But yeah, there are some that are very elaborate out there, and we wouldn't want to go like that, but maybe something in between would be good.
So let's go and just do thumbs up or thumbs down if you want to pursue this concept of credits for businesses and residents.
I would want to pursue the concept of credits, and I think 20% is just a menial credit. It needs to be substantial relative to the fact that the investment is substantial. So I'm on the credit.
Okay.
So on credits for stormwater compliance, I would be thumbs down, okay? I believe that the question that we have to ask ourselves as a council is, are we fairly allocating fees for compliance? The kind of improvements that Dennis made are on the quantity side. Credits absolutely are an appropriate thing once you're in the quantity side of the, area of collecting fees. And right now, our fees just cover the compliance side. So we have to ask, in response to Dennis and other property owners, we have to ask ourselves, is our structure right now fair for everybody for the compliance part of what we need to fund? Once we start talking quantity, absolutely it is fair, and we should have a system that recognizes improvements, recognizes total impervious surface versus a total surface versus total impervious surface, some type of modifying factor like that. So that, it's a complicated answer. We got a complicated situation.
That's why we've had so many meetings on this subject. I think I'd be interested in pursuing and studying more about it, particularly with the quantity side as well. I have to be very careful, though, that it's fair and equitable to everyone, and that we don't burden our residents either.
What?
Thumbs up,
Well,
thumbs down, where you at?
I'm interested in the credit. Our commercial, we pay a huge amount, more than the residents does for their taxes. And when you take a dam out of someone's property, and I've done subdivisions that way where I can't use it, but I still pay taxes on it. Commercial taxes are horrendous, and they don't recognize the fact that Dennis has a pond, or my property doesn't. It runs off, it's all impervious, got it. So you're getting a double whammy. You're going to pay a huge amount of tax. Commercial properties pay a lot of tax, and you can't use that land. But the second thing that really bothers me is here we are talking about stormwater, and this is too far afield. I'm interested in the credit. But previous councils and previous governments, not staff, people that got elected, have not done their job. That's why we're sitting here talking. It has been consistently kicked down the streets. We did it with streets, we did it with stormwater, and now us, the elected officials, have got to go out, plead and beg for, and take the heat and the flack for a tax, a fee. I think the city, it's all fungible, the money that comes to the city is, we should pay a penalty. And it should be taken from other functions to pay this. Or the city should suck up the administration that, I sat through that too, Dennis, and listened. That was to be a pure $1 million. Not get sucked up on administration and all the other stuff. I think the city should suck that up. That is our responsibility. That should have been our responsibility. Now we're not doing it. We did it for the streets, and we had to go out and plead for a tax increase. Now we're doing it again. We're doing it with stormwater. Thank God we have this group of people that are willing to take it. We're taking heat. There is some belt tightening that's got to be done by the city to suck that up and put that back. I know you don't agree with that accounting-wise. I don't agree with it. I think it's all fungible. I can't function that way with my company. I don't see why the government has to do the same. And it's not the staff's problem. I'm not putting that out there. I'm saying that previous elected officials kicked this damn thing down the road, and here we are talking about it. But we should have the guts to say, all right, the $1 million is the $1 million out. If it's administrative stuff, we got to suck it up in our budget.
So I would just like to add to that problem the unfunded mandates from the federal government.
But what are they? The EPA clear? All right, well, you go argue the government about it. Hell, they can't even build a damn wall.
I know. I'm just saying that's another part of the problem.
Well,
I agree.
that's a swamp we're never going to fix.
But we still have to pay for it. Dolly?
I agree with what you say with, we're talking about being fair and equitable across the board. And when you look back and you see what the city officials have done in the past, and we haven't held our feet to the fire to get anything done, I think it's up to us to get it done now. I think these credits are worth exploring. I'd like to see that they would be a little bit more unique in each situation. Like you say with the detention ponds, if they've gone above and beyond and built larger ponds, or seeing that they receive some kind of larger credit for that. I also kind of wonder, water rains down everywhere in town, but there are certain parts of town where the slope is higher, there's more water that runs off. And this may not be fair at all, but I just want to throw it out there. To maybe explore regional pricing. If you're in a certain region, you pay less, more, because it seems to be hitting certain places. I don't know how fair and equitable that is, but it might be something worth exploring. But I am in favor of these credits. I think it's a great step in the right direction.
Frank?
Well, like I said, I don't care what solution you come up with, whether it's a discount system or whatever. As long as we meet the EPA conditions and be able to set aside some money so we don't have these problems down the roadway. Okay? If you don't have something that's going to allow you to gain some dollars, guess what? We're right back the same place we were. So those are the only two things. I'll look at whatever they come up with solution, and if I think it's fair and equitable all around, then I don't have a problem with it. But that's my feeling.
Tony, I do have a question for you. At one of our last stormwater meetings, we did talk about the Tabor issues of putting general funds into an enterprise fund, the stormwater enterprise fund, and there's some Tabor problems with that. But then we found out later that there could be, was it 10% or something, that there was a portion of general fund money that could legally be put into the enterprise fund without getting into Tabor laws.
Yeah, for example, the mayor, I think, was getting to this point. If you want to reduce the transfer from the stormwater fund to the general fund to pay for streets, crews, Adams time, you could arbitrarily reduce that and still be consistent with Tabor.
So that's what I want to do.
Yeah. So we can bring you back some options on that.
So can we go get a thumbs up or thumbs down on pursuing that as well?
At the minimum, for example, we could come up probably with enough of a reduction in transfers to pay for the credit system, so there's no cost to the existing customer base. That would be a win-win.
I would really like to see
So we could probably come
any
up with.
possible way we can.
So why don't we'll
can
take a shot
do
at that, and that way it would be, expense neutral to the existing customer base and still give a benefit to these 112, 120 parcels that deserve some form of credit, and we'll work that system out. So knowing your interest, we can come back with something that could accomplish both those.
And will that require doing some shifting around in the budget for 2019?
We'll work with Harry and Adam, and we'll figure it out.
Meisner?
Tony or Adam, is it possible to have a dual structure? I'm going to call it a dual structure, or two stormwater fees. I'm going to call it that. One for the quality. I mean, I think John's got a real valid point. But could we have two stormwater fees, or stepped, that you got a quality fee and then you got a quantity fee, whatever you call them?
I know special districts do that. I mean, we'd just run it by the city attorney, again, the whole Tabor thing. I mean, we just have to get their opinion on it, but I know special districts do that where they have like an O&M flat fee. Everybody pays the O&M. Similar to on our water, you pay a meter fee. So everybody with a 3/4 inch meter pays the same meter fee each month, and then they pay for their actual usage. And so we could definitely set up that type of structure.
That's intriguing to me, from a standpoint that it helps get some separation with the concept that realistically, we've got two problems. We've got to take care of the quality issue, but the problem that everybody's having is the quantity issue, and that, I don't know whether that needs to be fixed or a very small impervious fee, but I've got some interest in two fees. One's for, for example, 1/10 of a cent, and the other one's for a cent. One's for quantity and one's for quality,
Okay,
however
so,
we name those.
so we have three things we want to see coming forward in the future. The credit system, that sounds like it would be tiered, or some possibly tiered different options.
The credit relative to the quantity.
Relative to quantity only. The transfer fund, and then the possible fees that are quantity-based and quality-based.
Okay.
And we do need to make sure with the attorneys that that's something we can do.
I mean, maybe one of them you just call, it's MS9?
MS4?
MS4.
MS4 fee.
Yeah.
We have an MS4 fee, and then we got a stormwater fee.
Is there anything else that council wants to see at this future meeting, I think? I think we're finally getting down to the
We're
to the
progressing. I mean, it's,
gritty detail.
I think we can bring you something back within the month, so.
I think timing is really important
Yeah.
because we are in the middle of doing the financing.
Yeah.
And I would make a recommendation that we don't create the issue in the middle of the financing. Otherwise, that can cause a problem in interest rates and rating agencies and other issues.
Well, I think we are committed to making sure that we have a sound fund.
Yeah.
It's just how that's going to look.
Right.
But Harry brings a valid point, rather than clouding a very complex financing in mid-February, we'll bring you back these proposed solutions right after that.
Yeah, we just don't want to be in the
days.
middle of a rate change when we're selling
Because
bonds.
he's right, if the rating agencies or the bond council gets wind of this, it throws them into a tizzy.
They will not.
Because they don't know
like
how
that,
it's
yeah.
going to potentially impact revenue streams and stuff, and so.
Right.
yeah, So we'll introduce these concepts to you right after the financing in mid-February.
Okay. Any other comments from staff?
No.
Council members?
Well, I'd like to, our staff has done a heck of a job on all this. My comments were directed at maybe previous elected officials that probably overlooked
Well,
it, not at you guys.
It does get a little irksome
Huh?
that some of these problems have compiled for so long.
And here we are.
And here we are. It can't be
And-
ignored any longer, and we have to take the brunt.
But they do. Every time we ask them, they come up and we get really good stuff. And to make me understand this, it's got to be good. All right? But thank you.
Yes, thank you, staff. A lot of time has been spent on this, and we really appreciate it. And thanks to Glenda as well. You don't get very many thanks in your job, and so today's a good day to say thank you for what you do as well.
Thank you.
And thank you, Dennis.
Are you
for
getting the
helping
walls
with
painted?
questions.
May? Great.
Glenda, do you want to come to the microphone and kind of talk about what,
I'm sorry.
Maybe give a
I
little
don't
bit
wanna-
of- a little
I don't want
mini
to stretch
spiel.
this out. I just wanted to,
just a little mini spill, because we do have a couple of minutes before we do interviews.
need to get my phone.
Okay.
So, for those of you here that might not know me, I'm Glenda DeBecker, stormwater technician for the city. What they're asking about is the Public Arts Mural Program that the city's stormwater program is involved with, along with Mountain View Core Knowledge School. So we're going to be refurbishing and replacing murals at the 4th Street Viaduct to start with environmental themes. They will highlight student K through 12 Canyon City students, their artwork. So we're in the process of accepting submittals right now from the students with a deadline of February 1st. We will prep the walls in March and have a selection process and an exhibition of the submitted artwork, and then final selection with painting starting in May, or maybe early June, before the kids all scatter for summer. But and so the Stormwater Fund, the city funds, and Mountain View Core Knowledge School are putting a small amount of money towards this, and we're working a lot with volunteers to get this done. Provide educational outreach on environmental issues, showcase local talent, and get the public involved.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Glenda.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate it.
Yep.
We're going to adjourn this meeting, and we'll meet again at 5 o'clock for Planning Commission interviews.
Oh, yeah.